Yawn. Yeah. Here. Joe. No. Yes. I'm sorry. All right. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. This is a call to order for the Finance Committee. The time is now 5:05. In attendance, we've got committee member Bobby Brown, committee member and chair Joe Sokolovic, Superintendent Testani, and online we've got our finance team, Ms. Siegel, Ms. Mauer, and what else I got? Clark. Ms. Lanier Clark. And the first item on the agenda is the approval of minutes dated September 21st, 2021. Do I have a motion to approve?
Motion to approve.
And I will second that. Any discussion?
Nope.
No discussion on my part either. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. Next up, we got an overview of grants, and their uses and the balances. Who's taking that up?
Good evening, Smallene Siegel.
Good evening, Ms. Siegel.
Good evening, Ms.
Evening. We're going to begin with a brief presentation on major grants in 2021-22. You should be able to see on the screen a PowerPoint. Can you see the PowerPoint?
1 second.
1 second, Marlene.
I'm sorry.
Thank you. What's up, Ms. Siegel?
All right, thank you. There are two major types of grants. There are allocated grants and competitive grants. In the case of allocated grants, the district is entitled to a specific allocation based on a formula. However, the funds are not released unless the district submits an application to the state specifying how the funds will be used in accordance with the guidelines. Competitive grants involve a competition with other districts or other entities for a specific grant fund source. And in that case, when the district is competing with others, the decision that is made by the fund source will be based on an evaluation of each application on the basis of specific criteria. This evening, we are focusing on allocated grants, and specifically the major allocated grants that are utilized to fund our strategic educational plan. So we're going to discuss briefly this evening the Alliance ECS Grant priority, state priority. On the federal side, Title I, Title IIA, Title III, and state bilingual, Title IV, and IDEA. Now, the Alliance ECS grant is part of our operating budget. The state allocates those funds to Alliance districts separately from the basic or core ECS allocation, but we treat it as part of our operating revenue. We do have to submit an Alliance budget plan and a program plan to the state for approval. And this year it is approximately $24.7 million. We utilize these funds for various strategies to increase student outcomes and close achievement gaps in the areas set by the state: talent, academics, climate, and operations. Now, I'm not going to read through all of the services that are included. I'll just mention a few to give you an understanding of how the funds are applied. And some of the services are at the elementary level, the intervention component of our prep enhancement teacher allocation. We also fund in the schools guidance counselors at the elementary level, library and media specialists, special education resource teachers. On the district side, we fund a percentage of various positions focused on educational support, such as executive directors and the chief academic officer and the director of bilingual world languages, as well as the district assessment coordinator. You have heard me speak in the past about applying Alliance as well to technology and curriculum renewal. Now, the second major grant is the State Priority Grant. And this grant has three components. The main component, the extended school hours component, and a summer component. The dollar amount, sorry, let's go back. Yeah, I'm seeing an overlap here. This has to be corrected at the top, but I believe the total is approximately $5.7 million. And the focus of the State Priority Grant is on extended day kindergarten, which basically means the full day rather than a half day. Reading and math instruction, dropout prevention, parent involvement, and technology, including instruction and parent communication. And some examples of how we utilize the Priority Grant include in the district office, we fund staff in the early childhood office. We also fund a portion of grants office staff. The entire grants office is funded in grants, primarily in Title I and the Priority Grant. We fund 50% of 50 kindergarten teachers at a cost of approximately $1.9 million in the current year. We have instructors on our academic support team. We have 2 positions in the Priority Grant, 1 position in the Alliance Grant. We also have restorative practice specialists at the elementary level. These positions replaced the former position of in-school suspension officer. We fund a few social workers. We're funding an assistant principal at the Fairchild Wheeler campus. And we fund services for the Bridgeport Military Academy, including the JROTC instructors. The United States Navy pays 50% of the salary, not the benefits, 50% of the salary for those instructors. And of course, we have the parent involvement allocation for the high schools, which is on parity with the Title I allocation. As I mentioned, there are 3 components. Everything that I mentioned so far pertains to the main component. There's also a summer component, which we utilize for the summer mandated literacy support programs, early reading success, and a portion of the special education extended school year program, which is split funded between the operating budget primarily and a portion in the Priority Summer Grant. For the Extended School Hours Grant, we fund the voluntary extended day programs at Classical Studies Main Building and Annex, and we issue an RFP each year. We're getting ready to issue the RFP soon for the 22-23 competition to select schools to conduct ESH programs within the guidelines and within the available funding after we allocate funds for classical studies. Now, the third grant is Title I. And Title I is designed to meet the educational needs of children in the nation's highest poverty schools in order to obtain a high quality education and reach, at a minimum, proficiency on academic standards. Title I, of course, is a federal grant. The 2 grants we already discussed, Alliance, ECS, and Priority, are state grants. So Title I is a federal grant. Now, in many of the federal and some of the state grants, there are non-public school components. and Title I has a non-public school component. So when you see a figure of 14.2 million, that figure includes the non-public school component, which is several $100,000. So what do we fund in Title I? We use Title I to fund, as I mentioned previously, grants office staff. They're split funded between Title I and the Priority Grant. We fund staff in the Early Childhood Office. We fund staff to support the School Readiness Program. We have 3 additional pre-K teachers beyond the teachers funded by our various pre-K grants, which are School Readiness, Smart Start, and Discovery Magnet. We also fund the excess operating costs for the pre-K classes, because in the pre-K grants that I just mentioned, School Readiness, Smart Start, and Discovery Magnet, there's not sufficient funds to fully support the cost, the full cost of teachers and paraprofessionals. So we are funding significant amount, well over $1 million in Title I for the excess cost. We also fund a large number of paraprofessionals, including special education assistants, as well as paras at the Bridgeport Learning Center. We fund some of the teachers in the school prep enhancement allocations. We also support our substitute teacher costs, as well as substitute paras for long-term para absence. And we have the parent involvement allocation, which is based on a standard formula. We allocate 1% of the Title I allocation to the elementary schools. That is how we determine the per capita, and then we apply that same per capita in the priority grant for the high schools. The next federal grant is Title IIA, and that is approximately $1.2 million. And Title IIA is focused on recruitment, primarily teachers, but other employees as well, for school operations and professional development. It's designed to strengthen the quality and effectiveness of teachers, principals, and other school leaders. How do we use Title IIA? We fund a significant number of positions in our Human Resources Office, specifically our HR recruiter and team facilitator, an HR support specialist, and an HR support assistant. We fund a percentage of key senior leadership, specifically executive directors and the chief academic officer and the director of bilingual world languages, in light of their significant role in planning professional development in the district. We fund recruitment initiatives. We fund the Teach for America cost for Teach for America teachers. We have funds for new teacher induction and orientation support. We also fund the ProTrack system and the cost of various professional development initiatives. And frequently, when funds are available, the portion of curriculum initiatives that relates specifically to professional development. The next grant is Title III, and that is the grant that is designed to provide services for English language learners. And that combines with the state bilingual grant. Title IV was initiated in 2017-18, and we have certainly been pleased that the Congress has continued to refund Title IV. Title IV is described as student support and academic enrichment. And the focus is on rounded educational opportunities, which are defined in a separate set of guidelines. We have to spend at least 20% on rounded educational opportunities. Safe and healthy students, which includes social emotional learning, bullying prevention and chronic absenteeism efforts to reduce chronic absenteeism, of course. And we have to expend at least 20% for safe and healthy students. It also includes technology for professional learning. And what this means is specifically professional development geared toward assisting teachers to utilize technology in the classroom. And we can fund a small portion for infrastructure, which is usually only a few $1,000s due to the nature of the formula. The formula is defined as a maximum of 15% of the total amount allocated to technology, but it's not really to technology, it's to professional learning for technology. So what we usually do is fund a major curriculum initiative that falls within the guidelines in Title IV, for example, the district-wide math programs into math most recently. And we take that professional development component and separate it, placing it on a separate line as professional learning. And then we can apply the formula and calculate the funds available for infrastructure. And again, it's a very low amount, just a few $1,000s. So what is our district plan? We include curriculum development for math and science, as well as literacy and social studies. We often purchased digital services or textbooks if needed for world language courses. At the high school level, advanced placement courses, as well as supplemental materials for the elective courses in social studies. We fund allocations to our schools for bullying prevention plans, chronic absenteeism reduction plans, and high school dropout prevention plans. We have a small amount of money allocated for parent involvement activities that are related to Title IV-A initiatives, so that we can fund, for example, refreshments at a meeting with parents that the superintendent might organize, as an example. And I mentioned the technology. Now, IDEA is another federal grant, and IDEA, of course, is federal funding for the education of children with disabilities. Now, I want to make a very important point, which is that you often hear emphasized that grants in general provide supplemental services, that grants cannot supplant services that already exist. And that is generally true, and we have spoken about that very important requirement on many occasions. IDEA, which is allocated by the federal government, is utilized to fund mandated special education services. So it is one of the few, it may be the only federal grant that is specifically designed for mandated services. And we include our transition center, our special education ombudsman at SCANE. I believe we're funding two pre-K teachers and 2 paraprofessionals across both IDEA grants. We have an IDEA grant that is labeled as K-12. That's called IDEA 611, and then there's IDEA 619, which is specifically targeted to pre-K, hence the focus on SCANE. We fund a large number of special education assistants. We fund all of our therapeutic support facilitators who are assigned to the Bridgeport Learning Center and to SOAR classes, the behavior support trainer, the recreation therapist at the Bridgeport Learning Center. We have a certified nursing assistant. We fund PPT and evaluation support, substitutes, special ed para services, assistive technology, and instructional materials and services and finally, instructional materials for CPI courses. And that concludes the PowerPoint, but before I stop to take questions, I would like to bring up the other document that we shared with you. And that document is the grants summary. So in the grants summary, we presented the history of all of the major grants that we discussed this evening. On the federal side, Title I, Title IIA, Title III, Title IV, IDEA, and IDEA Pre-K. And on the state side, state bilingual and the state priority grant. This is the history starting in 2014-15, and we can see the grand total change over time. And you can see specifically for 21-22, the total amount. And note that for Title I, Title II, Title III, Title IV, and IDEA, the amounts indicated are total allocations, including the non-public school amount. In the case of the state priority grant, there are three components, as I mentioned previously: the main grant, the extended school hours grant, and the summer grant. And this chart at the bottom shows each of those components, the changes in those components, and the grand total over 7 years. And what's very interesting about the state priority grant is that back in 2014-15, I remember the grant being approximately $6.7 million, and currently it is $5.6 million. And over 7 years, it has been reduced by 1.9 million, which is a loss of 25.56%. Of course, we have received additional funding in other areas, but it is disappointing to see that grant decline over so many years. And finally, there is a new grant through the ARPesser funding specifically for IDEA. And once again, there are two components: the 611 component, the 619 component. The 619 component is the pre-K component. And these are 2-year, it's actually a 2-year cycle in that these grants are going to end September 30th of 23. So when I speak of a 2-year cycle, I'm speaking of this year, 21-22, next year, 22-23, and there would be 3 additional months, July, August, and September, to expend any balances, if any balances exist at that point. And so we have these additional allocations for the main grant of almost 1.3 million in a 2-year cycle, and the 619 grant 123,837. So we are using the 611 grant, which is our K-12 allocation, to fund 4 new ASD classes, specifically the teachers. We're funding the paraprofessionals in Title I, and we're going to fund those 4 teachers over 2 years in this grant. We're also funding additional paraprofessional support. We have an ABA therapist through the Substitute Staffing Agency working at Johnson School as an example, and any additional PPT support or evaluation support that's needed will be provided through this grant on an hourly basis. In addition, there were some additional digital services in various special education areas, such as speech. There was one service for speech. I believe it's a 3-year cycle for that particular digital service, which was about $47,000. So that is being funded as an instructional service from this particular grant. So at this point, I'm going to stop. I'm just going to ask Nadira if she'd like to add any additional comments, and then we'll be ready for questions. Nadira?
No, you've covered everything, Marlene. Any questions?
It's fine. Any questions?
No question.
Yeah, that was very thorough.
Yeah.
But I do have a couple of brief questions. As far as, I'll let the record reflect, Mr. Benahan has joined the meeting.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Yeah, can you give me a little roundabout, how many smaller grants there are? I know that we can't cover them all, but just a roundabout, like how many smaller grants do we go after?
Yeah, Nadira?
Yeah, smaller grants that we have currently, you mean from private funders? Are you looking at a particular fund?
Just basically in total.
I think we have over 100 grants.
Wow.
Yeah, so that's why, yeah, under the private side, give me 1 second, I'll give you the number.
And by the way, we post the financial condition report 5 times a year, as I mentioned previously. And in the financial condition report, there is a tab for grants. And in that tab, you will see every grant that the district is administering. And it will show the allocation, the encumbrances, the expenditures to date, and the balances.
So right now we have 131 smaller private grants, which also include direct donations. That's could be coming through the foundation or directly to the district. They're not considered state or federal pass-through grants.
Okay, and what would make us go after a grant, or just, is there like a size of a grant we won't go after, or something that might not be worth our time to go after or whatever, or we just go after everything? I know, because I know the resources are limited.
Yeah, no, we go after everything. The biggest component is making sure that we're going to have a coordinator or a support related to the particular program from the district side. So I can't be the program coordinator for everything, especially let's say if it was something from math. We'd make sure that Mr. Planas was on board. It was something he was looking forward to, and he has several of those grants as well. So it really comes down to either it's a program, or if it's something that somebody's looking to donate for, we have, somebody to cover that particular item. As Marlene has gone over, we have several really large district-wide grants. Those are easier to manage because we already know where they're going. Something smaller and very specific, we need to make sure that there is a back-end person who's going to manage it.
And how big is our finance staff?
Not very big at all.
How big is our finance staff?
How big is our finance? I'm sorry, I can't understand.
Staff.
Finance staff, Marlene.
Oh, finance staff.
Mhm.
Count. Well, you have a CFO, and Liz Maurer is the manager of budget and financial reporting on the operating side. Then on the grant side, we have a director of grants development and management. That's Nadira, and we have a chief accountant. I mean, I know you're not asking me to go over each position, but the point is, we don't specifically have finance staff. We have a finance office, which is comprised of myself, Liz, the business office, and the grants office. I'd have to, check my district organization to get the exact number.
My point being is that you guys do, you ladies and gentlemen, do a phenomenal job managing all of this. It's more than just the budget and writing a check to each of these components. It's putting them in their spot and managing every single pigeonhole where these monies need to go. And it's a lot different from the city side budget, where it's just like one lump of money coming in from the property taxes that could just go to pay everything. So this is a much more difficult budget to manage, and ladies and gentlemen are doing a fine job at it. And I would like to thank you. Mr. Benahan, do you have any questions?
Yes, Mr. Chair, I have a question from Nadira Clark. Ms. Nadira, Ms. Clark, how are you?
I'm good. How are you, Mr. Benahan?
I know you said something we were talking about the grant. Though this grant, a special need department, are included there just in case it's a special need, they need it?
100%. So in terms of what Marlene was going over under IP, the IDEA grant, so that's, targeted for our special ed team. We did get recently a grant that was from the state. I think that was for $20,000 that we had some professional development, additional supports. So there are grants that are available. Like I mentioned, it just depends on what it is and if there's somebody to cover the overseeing of that program on the back end. But yes, special ed is getting what they're needing from our IDA program.
Thank you, Ms. Clark. No more questions, Mr. Chair.
Ms. Brown?
Yeah, so how does it work where if there's programs on the outside that the district doesn't have to pay for, but they can provide the resources? How do we receive that type of grant? So if there's an organization that has a certain amount of money that would like to do activities that require funds, but they can provide it, do we accept that as well? Is that like donations? Is that considered donations?
No, it's usually a partnership. We try to manage those through an agreement. They're at the discretion of Mr. Testani, and usually we're working together. There's somebody asking for a letter of support. They're writing a grant. He reviews that. It usually is coming to me sometimes. He usually reviews. If he approves of that, we give our permission to move ahead, and then we would have an agreement in place. Particularly, we've had something recently we're doing with UCLA that has, people, meaning teachers attending PD. We just want to make sure we have an agreement because there needs to be payments and it doesn't work out that well if you don't have something documented. So we try to make sure we have all our, I's crossed and T's, dotted or the other way around so that everybody's on the same page as to what's going on. Whatever money needs to come to us to make sure those payments are happening, we have a process for that.
Okay, good.
And to just add to that, the agreements are important just to make sure that the organizations have the proper liability insurance.
Correct.
In case, and that they're vetting their employees or their volunteers properly to work with our children. So those are just, safeguards that we like to put in place to cover not just the board as a fiduciary, but also to protect our children.
Okay, thank you. Any further questions? Okay, Ms. Siegel, you may now take it to the next.
Okay, thank you. I just wanted to, if I may just return to your prior question. We have 22 full-time positions currently across finance, operating budget, management and reporting, the grants office, the business office, and the payroll office.
Okay, thank you. And the next item is an update on ESSER funding balance, and you can take that away when you're ready.
All right, thank you. All right. We are in the process of completing the first formal financial condition report for 2021-22 as of October 31st. And that report will be posted in the first week of November, which is next week. The forecast for all major grants in round 1 of forecasting will be ongoing through November and will include the ESSER grants. So there is a difference between reporting on current encumbrances and current expenditures and current balances and the concept of fiscal forecasting. And so at this time, I'm going to discuss preliminary information based on initial projections for both the current year and across the term of each of the ESSER grants. And so there are 3 grants: CARES, or ESSER 1, ESSER 2, and ARPesser, also known as ESSER 3, right? Now, before I do that, I just want to return to the other concept that I mentioned, which is fiscal forecasting, specifically in regard to personnel. And so if we have a number of positions funded in a grant, the expenditures to date for those positions will only reflect the payroll to date. It will not reflect the full cost of the position for a whole year, assuming those individuals work for the entire year. So we have to engage in fiscal forecasting. We have to base that forecast on the actual salaries and benefits, which would include the assessment of the health insurance cost. And the health insurance cost will vary depending upon whether the individual is in class 1, class 2, or class 3 for health insurance, with class 3 being the most costly of the health insurance premiums. And so we're engaged in round number 1 of fiscal forecasting. So I'm going to go over now just some brief comments about initial projections. So first, we've been discussing since last year the CARES grant, or ESSER 1 grant. And that is a grant which will expire on September 30th of 2022, which is next September. And that appropriation was approximately $8.7 million. And you'll recall that appropriation included a non-public school amount. So the 8.7 is net of the non-public school allocation. So we actually had 8.7 million to spend. We carried forward at the end of the last fiscal year approximately 1.4 million, and our current balance, which is actually based on, at this point, on encumbrances and expenditures, since there are very few, at this point, there are not any full-time positions remaining in that grant. Our balance is about $140,000, and those funds are committed to planned expenditures for such services as the English Language Learner Labs, known as S-Life Labs at Bassick Central and Harding High School, temp support for technology, as well as any other relatively small purchases that we may need due to the amount remaining in technology or curriculum. So we expect to fully expend the CARES funds, the remaining funds, most likely by June 30th of this year. But if we do have a small balance remaining, we will exhaust that balance in the summer prior to September 30th of 22. Now, moving on to the ESSER 2 grant, that is a grant that will expire 1 year later than the CARES grant in September 30th of 2023. So we're looking at a 2-year cycle, 21-22, 22-23, and then another 3 months. And so the appropriation was about $44.6 million. And in this case, you'll recall that the federal government decided that they would not include the non-public school component in our allocation. They devised a separate funding stream for non-public schools. So we had 44.6 million approximately. And last year in 2021, we expended 1.9 million. That was for technology. And so we carried forward 42.7 million. Now, our initial projections indicate, after taking into account full-time personnel and vacancies that we're going to project as being filled. They may not be filled, but at this point in the year, we're going to project them as being filled. And taking into account all of the existing encumbrances for non-personnel services, supplies, and digital services, as an example, taking all of that into account, we're going to project that we're going to expend in the range of 18 to 20 million in the current year. Now, it could be 21 million. I'm giving you an initial projection, and the balance will be expended in 22-23 in accordance with our plan. So, for example, if we have 48 elementary academic support instructor positions, which we do, we have 48 allocated. We don't have 48 filled at the moment, but we have 48 allocated. we're projecting that those positions are going to continue into the new year unless there's a change in the plan that the superintendent, might approve. But we're assuming that they're continuing, and so the balance of the funding is going to be expended in accordance with the plan. In other words, we have a plan that was shared with the board in terms of the budget summary, and we are implementing that plan. Now, throughout the year, we monitor and we refine our projections. And so as accruals develop, which go into reserves, we keep the superintendent informed of the available reserves so that those funds can be redirected and redeployed within the categories approved for use in the grant. So the important point to remember is there is a plan and all funds are committed. But along the way, there may be accrued funds that develop due, for example, to vacancies that aren't filled for the full year. And finally, in regard to the ARPesser grant, also known as ESSER 3, that grant will expire 1 year later than ESSER 2, and that is September 30th of 2024. And so we think of ESSER 3 or ARPesser as a 3-year cycle, 21-22, 22-23, 23-24, and plus 3 months. So that appropriation was over $100 million. And in the current year, so far, our projections indicate, again, inclusive of full-time personnel, assuming that those positions remain filled through June, and assuming any vacancies are filled, and taking into account all expenditures to date for this year, we're projecting between 28 and 30 million in the current year, and then the balance would be expended in the following 2 years, once again in accordance with the plan. Now, we have funds allocated in both ESSER 2 and ARPesser for the critical categories of curriculum renewal, technology renewal, and facilities, as well as other areas. But in those areas in particular, we have several $1 million allocated in those areas to provide sufficient resources over the next 3 years to support our renewal needs. And those funds would be expended over time as the needs are further refined and the specific items or services to be obtained are finalized. Are there any questions?
Ms. Brown?
No questions.
Yeah, just one question and observation. I'm sure y'all gonna ensure that we don't leave $1 on the table of any of this money when the grants expire. Do we have a strong backup plan? Should we not fill these positions if there's like an excess of money laying around on the table at the end?
So that's a great question. I mean, in terms of, as we start to go through now, the facilities department is obviously always in need of additional funding. And given the fact that we're looking over the reports from all our HVAC system evaluation from the summer, we're finding that there are upgrades to HVAC systems that need to be done that we didn't anticipate. So I think that there'll be a shift probably from some of those excess expenditures in other areas into the facilities department. We're also trying to get a better understanding. It's being spec'd out now of our plan to add air conditioning to 2 buildings that have been renovated in the past, but HVAC was cut during those renovations. That's Columbus and Cross. So those are schools that it is worth investing in HVAC systems because they've already gone through a renovation. Yet those components of the renovation were removed from the budget because other expenditures came up. So there's always room to shift some money into that facilities component.
Yeah, and I'm glad to hear there's a backup plan, especially for things that'll continue beyond today and will benefit our students in the future.
Well into the future, and really making sure that our facilities are up to snuff with the expectations that other districts would have for their children and families. So
And where are we with the technology component? Do we have reserves for that as part of the plan?
oh yeah, Jeff has really had an opportunity to make sure that we can upgrade systems throughout the district. It's really now about supply chain and receiving goods. We've been prepared from the beginning. We're upgrading all our systems in every classroom to Promethean boards from the older smart boards. Those installs have begun already. We've got 2 vendors that we secured for labor for installation to make sure that there's no delay once we receive the product, that it is installed in a timely fashion so teachers can get to using the product and get trained. We're seeing that throughout the district already. We're doing obviously our neediest schools first. But as you can probably see, I was up at Discovery School a couple of weeks ago. Teachers are loving the new technology, Roosevelt School. So this is going to be a huge upgrade and a great tool to give to our teachers.
Awesome.
I guess I don't have a question, but just maybe an observation. I know that we have to use the first set of monies between now and 2022 for the first one. Do we have an outline schedule of, not schedule, but a plan in place to be able to use those funds? So you'll know okay, in the month of January, we'll cover this amount that breaks down that money up until that day so that there isn't any excess funding.
Oh, I see what you're saying.
Does that make sense?
Yeah. No, the finance department is extremely careful, and as Marlene mentioned, the forecasting.
Mm-hmm.
So we're always looking ahead to see
Okay, good.
where we're at and what the anticipated either shortfall could be if we're overspending,
Mm-hmm.
or where the excess could be. So they do a phenomenal job in making sure that I'm aware, maybe you need to pump the brakes a little bit and be a little bit more conservative, or, we have enough money, let's look at our backup plans, whether it's curriculum renewal, whether it's technology or facilities, that we can start allocating more money that way.
Okay.
Anybody else? Well, thank you very much. I think that's the last item on the agenda. If you ladies have anything else?
Thank you.
No, thank you.
All right, thank you, everybody. And now I'll take a motion to adjourn.
So move.
I'll second. All in favor?
Aye.
Have a great night, everybody.
Good night.
Get home safe.
Thank you.
Good night, everyone. Thank you.
Right.
Good night.